My sister ruined my life by helping my ex-wife force me to pay child support for a child that isn't mine while hiding her own affair. I'll start by saying that I truly despise my sister, albeit this wasn't always the case. She is my older sister, and as we grew up I admired her greatly. However, she has shown me throughout time that she can be a dreadful sister. My ex-wife, Susie, and I had been married for 2 years before I found out she was cheating on me. The information came as a complete shock. I recall the moment well. I was going through her messages when I came across a chat in which she confessed to sexting with her male best friend for 8 years. Susie had always told me that he was merely a friend who had been in her life forever. Despite occasional envy, I had great faith in her. We had established our relationship on trust. So when I unintentionally discovered the explicit text exchanges between them, I was completely taken aback. It felt as if the basis of all I thought in our marriage had crumbled in an instant. When I challenged her, she broke down and apologized profusely. She argued that it was only a one-time mistake and that her friend meant nothing to her in that sense. She vowed to block him and assured me that it would never happen again. Despite my rage and pain, I wanted to trust her. We began going to marriage counseling because I was terribly hurt by her betrayal and needed to understand why it happened and whether our marriage could be saved. Susie appeared to be truly sorry throughout counseling. She accepted responsibility for her misdeeds and worked diligently to recover my trust. For a time it seemed like we were making significant progress. She was attentive, open, and willing to work to repair our connection. I decided to stay and give our marriage another opportunity because I still loved her and wanted to believe that people could change and relationships could be repaired. However, as you may have predicted, it was a huge error. After a while, I discovered that my ex-wife was attempting to meet up discreetly with her male best friend. She had told me earlier that evening that she was going out with a coworker, but something about her demeanor looked off. I trusted my instincts and called the coworker after Susie departed. To my dismay, they informed me that they had no plans with Susie. I felt a wave of sadness and confusion rush over me. It was becoming brutally evident that Susie was meeting up with this guy, otherwise she had no reason to deceive me. My mind raced with thoughts of betrayal as I attempted to call her several times, but she disregarded each call. As the night progressed, I felt an increasing sense of dread and helplessness. She arrived home pretty late and utterly inebriated. I'd been waiting for her all evening, sitting on the couch in our living room, my head whirling with emotions. When she stepped through the door, she didn't acknowledge me. Instead, she stumbled past me on her way to the bedroom as if I didn't exist. I sat there feeling invisible and completely saddened, understanding that the woman I once trusted and loved had become a stranger to me. Later, as I was about to fall asleep, I heard her phone beep on the bedside table, indicating a message notification. Susie had fallen asleep wearing her evening clothes, evidently too inebriated to change. I carefully covered her with a blanket and, filled with dread and curiosity, leaned over to see what message she had received. I knew the number right away. It belonged to him, her male acquaintance. My heart fell as I read the words. That was so much fun. We should do this more frequently. The message ended with a tongue and a sweat drop emoji, which made matters worse. I felt a rush of sickness come over me. There was no way a guy would send a message with those images unless something big had occurred between them. My mind raced with frightening thoughts of what they may have done. I felt ill to my stomach as I realized that my worst worries were probably true. I attempted to relax myself, but it was impossible. The betrayal felt like a real agony in my chest, and I couldn't shake the thought of them together. I couldn't get any sleep that night. I tossed and turned in bed, my mind filled with fear and grief. The night seemed long, and by the time daylight arrived, I knew nothing would ever be the same. When I confronted Susie about that night and how she had lied, She tried everything she could to avoid accepting responsibility. Initially, she attempted to manipulate and gaslight me, stating that my lack of trust was the real issue and that calling her coworker was a violation of her privacy. She accused me of being neurotic and unreasonable. Her attempts to gaslight me were difficult and unpleasant, but I refused to give in. I brought up the message he sent and demanded an explanation. She dismissed it, claiming that that's just how friends talk to each other, and called me crazy. Her dismissive tone simply strengthened my drive to discover the truth. I chose to play my final card. I told her that if she didn't come clean, I would approach him directly. This warning seemed to hit a chord. She became visibly uncomfortable and attempted to persuade me not to contact him, evidently concerned about the repercussions. Susie eventually broke down and confessed. Despite her initial resistance and reluctance, she stated that she had wanted to meet him for a long time and that they had made out after becoming intoxicated. Her statement was like a blow to the gut, confirming my worst concerns and breaking any remaining faith I had in her. She proceeded to defend her behavior, claiming that our marriage had grown dull and she was looking for excitement elsewhere. I firmly objected, pointing out that her adultery and deception were the very reasons our marriage had deteriorated. I reminded her that it was hard to go back to normal after realizing she was sexting with another man. Despite her attempts to excuse her behavior, I held firm. I made it plain that she was solely responsible for breaking our vows and shattering the trust we had built. I voiced my severe displeasure and informed her that I had reached my breaking point. I couldn't just ignore her actions and pretend everything was fine. Susie, recognizing the enormity of the situation, started appealing for pardon. She admitted her issues, but begged me not to abandon her, emphasizing her willingness to work on herself and our relationship. Despite her vows, I realized that our trust had been irreparably shattered. The damage was too severe now, and I knew that continuing would just prolong the inevitable. Her infidelity had left a chasm that we couldn't mend, and our marriage was irreparably destroyed. After learning this, I had to make the most difficult decision of my life, to ask her to leave my house. Fortunately, we had a prenuptial agreement in place, so I was relieved that it would safeguard me from any potential financial consequences of our divorce. Despite her desperation and attempts to enlist her friends to encourage me to forgive her, I stayed firm in my decision and eventually booted her out onto the streets. I know this may seem harsh to read, but I was in too much suffering. I had always imagined that we would grow old together, but her betrayal left me devastated, and I knew I would never be the same again. I told my parents and older sister Na about what had happened between me and Susie. They were astonished and disturbed by the news, as no one had expected Susie's behavior. They informed me of their support for divorcing her, which gave me some consolation. However, Na appeared abnormally silent throughout this, which struck me as peculiar. When I asked for her thoughts, given her strong friendship with Susie during our marriage, she answered unexpectedly. Instead of embracing my emotions of betrayal, Na questioned if I was certain about divorcing her, pointing out that, unlike me, Susie had family support. Na's remark surprised me, since it seemed like she was more concerned about Susie's well-being than the emotional turmoil I was experiencing. I answered sternly to Na, indicating that I didn't care about Susie's support system because she had decided to betray me multiple times through infidelity. I made it clear that Susie's well-being was no longer my concern, and I wondered why she seemed more concerned about my ex-wife than about me, her own brother. Na justified herself, stating that she was only concerned about me and did not want me to make rash decisions concerning my marriage. She stated that she had always believed Susie and I were meant for each other, and that she was still shocked by our divorce. As a result, she inquired as to whether I would have any regrets in the future. While I found her remark weird at the time, I didn't think about it too much later. The entire situation was already emotionally draining Initially, everything appeared to be going well for me during the divorce proceedings, and my lawyer was certain that we would win. But suddenly everything changed. Susie announced a bombshell. She was pregnant. This discovery really caught me off guard. I had not expected it at all. Clearly life had other plans for me and intended to hurt me even more. Susie and her lawyer asked me to put the divorce proceedings on hold after hearing this news. They stated that we should strive to resolve matters for the sake of our child. Susie insisted on providing our child with a conventional family structure, which I found laughable, considering she was the one who had cheated. Still, I didn't want to take any chances, especially with a potential child involved. The catch: I could not be certain whether I was the father. I had no idea how long her affair had been going on. For all I knew, she could have been pregnant with someone else's child. My sister, Na, constantly encouraged me to acknowledge Susie's claims that I could be the father and agreed to pay child support until a paternity test proved otherwise. I eventually relented because Na kept insisting that I ought to do the right thing. I could not fathom how my own sister could support this woman's lie, knowing how much pain Susie had put me through. Na's insistence turned into full-blown manipulation. When I rejected her requests, she consistently pressured me to see things from a different perspective, how it was best for the child, and how the child should not suffer due to the mistakes of the parents. She maintained that if it turned out I was the biological father, I would be morally obligated to support my child. I believed Na was solely concerned for the child's welfare and was unable to grasp how the ramifications of Susie's lies and manipulations could affect me. Under pressure from my sister and my ex-wife, I eventually agreed to cover child support, thinking it was the right choice. I still held on to a shred of hope that I could somehow bond with this child, believing that maybe it could lead to some sort of reconciliation with Susie. But the paternity test results confirmed my worst fears. I was not the biological father. I felt immense relief that I wasn't tied to that deceitful woman, yet I couldn't shake the overwhelming resentment I felt towards Na. I confronted her about the situation, explaining how her manipulations had led me to a dark place. She acted as if she were oblivious, insisting that she was just trying to do what was right for the child. I found it incredibly frustrating and infuriating that she continued to enable my ex-wife despite everything she had put me through. In the end, I realized that the support I sought from my sister had morphed into an ordeal that left me feeling even more isolated and betrayed. Update: a new chapter. The aftermath of the divorce left me in a tumultuous whirlwind. It had been several months since I confronted Susie and sent her packing, but the weight of that betrayal still felt heavy on my chest. I tried to fill the void with distractions, work, friends, even hobbies I had abandoned during my marriage. But the reality was that I felt adrift, unmoored in a sea of pain and confusion. The news of Susie's pregnancy had rocked my world even more than her infidelity. For weeks I wrestled with a mix of dread and resentment. When the paternity test results came in, the relief that washed over me was quickly followed by a bitter tide of anger towards my sister Na. She had pushed me into a corner, convincing me to take responsibility for a child that wasn't mine, all in the name of doing what was right. It felt like another betrayal, one that cut deeper than the first. I distanced myself from Na, avoiding her calls and text messages. I needed space, time to process the chaos that had unfolded around me. My phone would light up with her name, and each time my heart would race, not with excitement, but with anxiety. Did she really believe that siding with Susie? Did she think I could just forgive and forget? Days turned into weeks, and I focused on rebuilding my life piece by piece. I threw myself into my work. My colleagues noticed my renewed dedication, but they couldn't quite understand the storm raging within me. I often found myself lost in thought, staring out the window at the city skyline. One chilly evening, I decided to visit a local cafe, a cozy spot I used to frequent with Susie. The familiar ambience was both comforting and haunting. As I sipped my coffee, I spotted a couple at a nearby table, their hands intertwined, laughing easily. It made my heart ache, a bittersweet reminder of what I had lost. But it also sparked something within me, a desire to find joy again, to open my heart to new experiences, even if they felt foreign and frightening. In the weeks that followed I began to explore what life could be without Susie's shadow looming over me. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected during my marriage. I joined a book club, a group of diverse individuals who shared a love for literature. Each meeting was an opportunity to discuss not just books, but life itself. It was refreshing to hear different perspectives, to find solace in shared experiences. I also sought therapy to unpack my feelings. My therapist, Lisa, was a calming presence who encouraged me to confront the emotions I had been bottling up. She guided me through the anger I felt towards Susie, as well as the confusion and resentment I harbored towards Na. It was a liberating process, one that allowed me to reclaim my narrative. I learned that my worth was not defined by someone else's actions or betrayals. I was capable of forging my own path. Despite the progress I was making, thoughts of Na still haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal every time I thought about how she had enabled Susie, convincing me to support a lie. But part of me understood that Na, too, was navigating her own complexities. She loved Susie like a sister, and maybe her intentions, however misguided, stemmed from a desire to protect me and my ex-wife's future child. Finally, after months of silence, I decided to reach out to Na. It was a tentative step, filled with uncertainty. I wanted to express my feelings, to confront the hurt without letting it fester any longer. We agreed to meet at a neutral spot, a park where we used to spend time during our childhood. As I approached her, I felt a mixture of apprehension and longing. She was sitting on a bench, staring at the ground. When she noticed me, her face lit up momentarily before settling back into a mask of uncertainty. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey," she replied, her tone soft but guarded. We exchanged small talk at first, each hesitant to address the elephant in the room. Finally, I took a deep breath. "I've missed you, Na, but I need you to understand how deeply hurt I felt by everything that happened. Your insistence on supporting Susie, pushing me to accept child support, it felt like a betrayal." Her expression softened, and she nodded slowly. "I understand why you feel that way." I was coming from a place of wanting to do the right thing. I didn't see it clearly. I just thought about the child and wanted to protect you too. I see now how I failed to consider your feelings. I appreciated her honesty. It felt like you were prioritizing her over me. I needed support, and instead, I felt isolated. I'm so sorry for that. I should have been more aware of your pain. I can't take back what I did, but I want to be here for you now," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I want to mend our relationship." The air between us felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. "I think we can try," I said cautiously, "but it's going to take time." As we continued talking, I realized that healing was a two-way street. Na had her own wounds to bear, shaped by her loyalty to both me and Susie. We agreed to take it slow, to rebuild the trust that had been fractured. It wouldn't be easy, but the willingness to communicate was a solid foundation. Months passed, and I found myself moving forward in ways I never expected. I began dating again, cautiously opening my heart to the possibility of new connections. Each date was a step outside my comfort zone, but I learned to embrace the uncertainty. I met interesting people, shared laughs, and even found myself flirting again, something I had thought was lost to me forever. Through it all, Na remained a constant presence in my life. We reconnected over shared memories and new experiences, and gradually the shadows of the past began to fade. She supported me through the ups and downs of dating, listening to my stories and offering advice. The bond we had once lost was slowly being rebuilt. brick by brick. Meanwhile, I learned about Susie's journey from afar. She had given birth to a healthy baby, and I felt a strange mix of emotions whenever I heard updates through mutual friends. Part of me wanted to reach out to express my good wishes for the child, but another part of me recognized that our chapter was closed. I had no place in that new family, and I was okay with that. Eventually, I reached a point where I could reflect on my past without being overwhelmed by grief. I had been through the fire, and although it had scarred me, it had also forged a stronger, more resilient version of myself. I was learning to love myself, flaws and all, and that realization was empowering. As I sat in that same cuff, sipping coffee and reading a novel, I looked around at the laughter and connection around me. It felt like a new beginning, a fresh canvas waiting for me to paint my story anew. I was ready to embrace whatever came next, leaving behind the pain of betrayal and stepping into a future filled with possibility. The journey wasn't over, but it was mine, and I was determined to make the most of it. Final update: a new dawn. Months rolled by like the changing seasons. The pain of the past began to feel like a distant memory, a shadow that had once loomed large but now faded softly into the background. I had learned to embrace the lessons life threw my way, and with each passing day I found more clarity and strength. My relationship with Na had transformed. The awkwardness that once colored our interactions had evolved into something warmer, more genuine. We shared not just laughter and stories, but a deeper understanding of each other's journeys. We talked openly about our feelings, our missteps, and the ways we had let each other down. Slowly, the fractures of the past healed, and a renewed bond formed between us, one built on honesty and mutual respect. As for my dating life, it blossomed in ways I never anticipated. I met Emma, a fellow book lover with a contagious enthusiasm for life. Our first date was filled with playful banter and a shared love for the written word. She had a way of making me laugh. Each time we met, I found myself opening up more, letting her in. With her, the fear of heartbreak lingered but didn't consume me. Instead, it served as a reminder of the resilience I had cultivated. Emma was patient, understanding my hesitations and insecurities. She listened as I shared the stories of my past, including the tumultuous chapters with Susie and Na. Instead of judgment, I found empathy in her eyes. "You've been through a lot," she said one evening, her voice soft yet resolute. "But that doesn't mean you're defined by it. You're building something new, and that's beautiful." With her support, I began to dream again, not just of love, but of a future filled with possibility. I took on new challenges at work, pushing myself creatively. I embraced change, whether it was signing up for a painting class or joining a local hiking group. Each step outside my comfort zone reinforced the belief that I could create my own happiness. Then came the day I received a call from Na. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, the kind that filled the air with the scent of falling leaves and change. "I know this might be out of the blue," she began, her tone more serious than usual, "but I think it's time I introduced you to someone." Curiosity piqued, I listened as she explained that Susie had reached out to her, wanting to discuss the possibility of co-parenting the child. "I wanted you to be the first to know," Na continued. "I understand if you need time to process this, but I thought it was important to keep you in the loop." A swirl of emotions flooded through me: anger, confusion, but also a strange sense of closure. "Thanks for telling me, Na. I need some time to think about this," I replied, my voice steady despite the whirlwind in my mind. That evening I took a long walk, the cool air refreshing against my skin as I processed Na's words. The idea of Susie wanting to reconnect was daunting. Part of me wanted to ignore it entirely, to keep the walls I had built firmly in place. But another part of me recognized that this was an opportunity for resolution. A few days later, I agreed to meet with Susie. The meeting was set at a small park on neutral ground, with the trees overhead shedding their golden leaves a perfect metaphor for transformation. When I saw her, a rush of memories flooded back, the laughter, the shared dreams, the painful betrayal. Yet, as I approached her, I felt a strange calm wash over me. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, her voice tentative yet sincere. "I know things ended poorly, but I wanted to talk about our daughter." "Your daughter," I corrected gently, the words tasting bittersweet on my tongue. "I'm not her father." "I know, but I hope we can find a way to coexist for her sake. I want her to know about you, about the family she has. I understand if you are angry, but I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive." As we talked, I could see the change in her. The bravado that once defined her seemed softened, and beneath it lay genuine remorse. We discussed boundaries, responsibilities, and what it meant to co-parent. The conversation flowed, punctuated by long pauses filled with unspoken feelings. It was a tentative step toward healing, and by the time we parted I felt a sense of relief and acceptance that while our paths had diverged, we could at least navigate the future with some understanding. The following weeks were filled with a whirlwind of emotions. I met the baby girl who would forever connect Susie and me, and in those moments I saw hope. I found myself smiling at the idea of her growing up surrounded by love, even if it looked different than I once envisioned. Emma and I forged a circle of support, united by a common purpose: child. Emma embraced the situation with grace, assuring me that she was there ready to take each day as it came. With we built a family dynamic that felt less like a burden and more like a shared journey. Eventually, I found peace in knowing that the past had shaped me but didn't define me. I was no longer the person who had been blindsided by betrayal. I was a man who had weathered the storm, learned from it, and emerged stronger, surrounded by love, forgiveness, and possibility. As I sat in that cafe once more, the aroma of fresh coffee swirling around me, I looked out at the world with a renewed sense of purpose. Life was unpredictable, yes, but it was also beautiful in its chaos. I smiled to myself, ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing that I had the strength to face it head on. With that realization, I knew I was stepping into a new dawn, a chapter filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities. And in that moment, I felt truly free.